Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, it's great to have you on Life Support. What we do on this podcast is we tell stories, we talk about some difficult topics as well, and how Jesus always shows up during the hard times in life. And so we're always excited to glorify Christ here, and we're excited to have really interesting guests, and we have one of those with us today. Chris Bolinger is my guest. He is an author of men's devotionals. He's going to tell you about that and how he is taking time now to encourage men who need to be encouraged for sure in our culture. Chris, thanks a lot for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So you made a transition from the business world into the devotional writing world. Now, you wouldn't normally put those together. How did God take you from one part to another?
Well, God always uses our talents or gifts that He's given us in whatever way He wants to. So, for most of my tech career, I was a product manager. I started off as a software engineer, and frankly, I really couldn't cut it. I mean, I was okay, but I used to room with a couple of guys that were also software engineers, and they could write code, much better than I could. So I went back, got my MBA, and I ended up getting into a position called product management. And it's a neat position because what you do is and not just what the customer wants, but what the customer really needs. Now, I was selling, I was involved in being a product manager for software solutions for companies. So not all of this is transferable to writing a devotional. But what I discovered was that the better you get to know the people you're trying to reach, the more effectively you can reach them. If my company had the right software for a particular prospective customer, then my job was fairly easy. I just had to help them understand how our software would meet their requirements. If we didn't have the right solution, then I would have to go back to the development team and say, hey, we've got all these people out here that have this need. Maybe we can fill this need. If you guys just did a little something differently, we would have a solution for these folks' need. The reason I mention all of this is that when I thought about writing a men's devotional, part of it was for me. I figured there were guys like me out there, but I also just looked at what was available to guys. And what I found was that very few of the like you said, there's very few men's devotionals out there, but of the ones that I saw, most of them were not terribly encouraging. And so I figured there's got to be an audience of men out there who, yes, they want to be challenged. Yes, they want to get deeper into their Bible, but they also would some stories about men that would lift them up and encourage them to keep with it. God's got your back, just like God had the back of this particular man, and you can do this. So that's how I kind of took the experience and gifting that God had given me in terms of discovering people's needs and tried to fill those needs with what I was writing.
That's really good. Men a lot of times suffer in silence, and so reaching out to them is really, really important. Now, I know one of the things you do in order to write is you are always scouring the world for stories, right? You're hopping around on websites. I love that you mentioned ESPN.com because I probably actually keep ESPN in business. So well done.
Do you have your bracket done?
Well, I only have one team that I care about, and the Arizona Wildcats are going to win it all, so I just didn't bother with the bracket this year. What about a couple of stories? We like to tell stories here. What are a couple that you ran across that you thought, wow, this is really encouraging and could really help some guys?
Well, speaking of ESPN.com, so I was, I think I was writing on patience. Because the book that I wrote most recently, 52 Weeks of Strength, had the topics pretty well in mind, and then I went looking for Bible passages that supported the topics and were encouraging. And then I went looking for stories. So, in the sports world, everybody knows the Kurt Warner story. Most people know the Kurt Warner story. And there was a big movie, I think it was last year, about Kurt Warner. And so I started with that, how about, Warner really, nobody gave him the time of day when he was in college. He was a good quarterback, but I think he sat the bench for 3 years. He might have even transferred colleges. And then in his senior year, finally got a chance to start, was all world, but it was a fairly, I think it was a Division I school, but it wasn't a big conference school. So nobody looked at him. I think he tried out with the Packers, didn't make the team. And so he's stocking grocery shelves, and everybody knows the story. Eventually the Rams pick him up and he, wins the Super Bowl and MVP and all that. It's a great story.
Yeah.
But I was on ESPN.com and I read this story about a guy that had been in the minor leagues for, I think it was 16 or 18 years. And at the time they wrote the story, he still hadn't made it to the majors. And it was such a great story because, why do you keep doing this? I mean, minor leaguers do not make much money. I mean, AAA, they may make enough to pay the bills. And this guy's been AAA. And so after the ESPN story ran, he got his chance in the majors. So it's the Kurt Warner story. Finally gets his chance. He had 12 at-bats, and then they sent him back down and never made it back. And he got one hit. Mm-hmm. Kind of reminded me of the Field of Dreams story with the Moonlight Graham, where he never got a chance at the made the majors, never.
Yeah.
And so, what does that have to do with patience? Well, what I found was sometimes these stories make me cry. The real story here was the fact that this guy found joy in going to the ball field every day. He was playing a game as an adult. He was getting paid a little bit of money for it, but the joy was in the journey for this guy. And so I basically started with the Warner story, and then I shifted to this guy's story, and then I finished it off with, most of us are never going to make the majors. We're going to toil away. We're going to toil away in the back of the stage if we ever make the stage. Sorry, I'm getting kind of choked up. But, God honors our work wherever we are. And it's not about making the majors. It's about making a difference wherever you are. So that's one example of a story that really meant a lot to me. And I'm hoping that, when people encourage them to keep plugging away, because God understands and God loves the fact that you're doing good work for him wherever you are.
Yeah, I'm thankful for that. In meeting a lot of pastors, we live in a celebrity culture, even within the Christian evangelical world. It's really not that much different than the culture itself. We measure people, we measure ourselves by standards of success that I don't think God ever intended. And there are pastors sitting at home thinking, I've failed. I must not be that good at my job, or I would be pastoring a larger church. I would be writing books. I would be speaking at conferences. But I love that message of, that's really not true. That's a lie. Because God has placed each person, no matter what, if you're in the church, outside the church, working in what I would call a real job, you're doing something that's important, and God has put you there. And I love that encouragement, because it is hard to disengage from cultural views of success. And I think guys, especially, have a really hard time doing that. Because the first question they always get asked is, what do you do for a living? Yep. Right? And so they get asked that question, and then they're thinking through, well, how do I tell somebody that I'm this? Or how do I really make this sound a little better than what I really do? Because they're already on defense. They're already knowing that they're going to be judged for that. So thank you for telling those stories. It's really important for them to hear. And I love that minor league story, by the way. And there's a lot of guys that are like that just toil away, and they might come up, maybe get some spring training. They might get a shot in September if the GM is a nice guy, and that's it. And then they go back and they do their thing. And somehow they've come to grips with the fact that they may never make it, but they're okay. They're okay with themselves. And so that's a great story.
Friend of mine, his son had a meteoric rise in the minors. I mean, he started off in low single A, and a year later ended up getting a starting pitching job with the Padres a couple years ago. And went about half a season with the Padres, and then ended up getting traded to the Mariners, and then had arm surgery last year. And it's not the pinched nerve, but it took him out for the whole season. Came back this spring, cut him. And my friend sent me a message, because I had posted a devotion or something online, and just said it was an absolute punch in the gut. I mean, this kid did make the majors, kind of unexpectedly, and now he's cut and doesn't know what he's going to do. And he's probably 25. I mean, we can say, well, he'll be okay. But yeah, you never know. And so you start to say, well, God, why did this happen? And where do you really want me? And yeah, pastors, I mean, Barna just had another version of their survey that came out, and it's pretty grim. I mean, a lot of 41% of pastors, I think, want out of the profession, if I read the numbers right. Yeah, it's tough. And just to encourage pastors, I don't know if you all know this, but the main reason why megachurch pastors books, why they have so many books and why they do so well, is because it's a reduction of risk for the publisher. I mean, they've got a built-in audience. Mm-hmm. And so the publisher figures, well, worst case, if every member of the congregation buys a book, then we'll cover our expenses. So, I mean, some of them are very good. Don't get me wrong. I mean, sure. I think Kyle Idleman's books are fantastic. That it's just kind of an industry insider thing that, if you're a small church pastor, good luck getting a publishing contract, because they're just, they're going to go with the big guys.
That's right. And that's understandable. You mentioned the last time we were together that you had gone through a divorce and in kind of this process of changing careers and writing and so forth. How has that pain enabled you to write with empathy, and has it opened up doors for you as you write?
It really has. I mean, I don't, it's more apparent in my articles than in my books. I write books for everybody. And so I do have a devotion on divorce and one on marriage in my second book. But definitely it colors everything that I do. It colors everything that I write, because it had such a profound impact on me. Before I got divorced, I didn't really hang out with divorced people. I mean, I was doing the church thing, where, you go to a couple small group with other couples, and, they each have 2.5 kids like you do. And, it's just kind of the way churches are structured.
Yep.
And then, ironically, I went through a divorce just a couple of months after another guy was really bloody. So I found myself encouraging him, because mine, in comparison, mine wasn't so bad, even though it was terrible. And yeah, it kind of opened my eyes to, it's like I came out of a cave, and it's like, hey, look at all these divorce guys out here. I never saw them before. So it's given me a heart for guys that have been through a divorce. And I've got a bunch of stats that I won't get into on this podcast. But if you look at my articles on crosswalk.com, you'll find 5 or 6 on men and divorce, Christian men and divorce. And it's very discouraging, because what happens to a lot of guys is the church doesn't know what to do with them. And in a lot of cases, they feel abandoned. So they leave that particular church. And then by my analysis, about 25 or 30% of them, including longtime committed Christians, they just walk away from the faith. They're so wounded, not just because of the divorce, but because of the way they were treated, that they never come back. And it's a loss that we can't take as a Christian body. So yeah, and because I've written these articles, I have been contacted by, I've lost track, but probably stories, and they're obviously still very, very wounded.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm
yeah,
sorry
it's
you
given me
had
a
that.
heart. It's given me a heart for those guys and for other guys too, just because the more I talk to guys, which I really didn't do a lot in the first 45 years of my life, but the more I talk to guys, the more I find out that guys are dealing with a lot and not feeling like they're getting a lot of support from other guys and other people in general.
Yeah. Well, it's really true. And Chris, the books that you've written, we've been making reference to them, but we haven't named them. We don't really know that much about them, and we don't know where to access them. So tell me about the books you've written.
Okay, Daily Strength for Men is the first one. It's as the name implies, it's a daily devotional study. I cheated a little bit, and I have a devotion for every 2 days. The first day is my thoughts, and then the second day is Bible passages, questions, prayer, other things. So it gives guys a couple of days to really kind of ingest and apply what I'm sharing. But it's got the typical devotional format, which is to say it's kind of like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. I go through the Old Testament, and it's all Old Testament verses, which I think is unique. But I go through it in book order, and I do have at least one verse from every Old Testament book, including. But that one's available really pretty much anywhere you go. I mean, it's on the inspirational reading rack in your local supermarket and CVS or Walgreens and airports and all over the place, and obviously Christian bookstores and Amazon and christianbook.com and all the usual places. The second book is a more structured book. It's called 52 Weeks of Strength for Men. It is topic based. There's 4 sets of 13 topics. The nature of God in the day-to-day, big topics and tough topics, where I get into fun topics like death and divorce and pride and wealth. Again, just to challenge and encourage guys to think about these topics. That one is available mostly online. You'll find it in some Christian bookstores, but easier to find it on Amazon, christianbook.com, Barnes & Noble, the online outlets.
And you also have a website too to learn more about you and access the books, right?
Right. 52. No, I'm sorry. Mensdevotionals.com. I do have a 52 Weeks of Strength website coming up soon, because I'm launching an online study guide, a free online study guide for my second book, but that's not up yet. So please don't go there. It's not even beta test.
Page under construction. Yes.
Official site.
Okay. What's next then? What do you have coming up? What are you thinking about doing next?
I'm working with men's ministries and really trying to help them. So I'm writing articles for Crosswalk, and some upcoming articles are really going to focus on the target is pastors, and the topics are how to get a men's ministry going, how to strengthen your men's ministry, how to have that big event and then not lose all the guys after the big event. And I'm also dealing with some topics in the sexual addiction area. How to help your guys overcome porn, how trauma impacts guys and leads to addictions, and among the men in your church and elsewhere. So that's my near-term focus is really working with men's ministries and trying to help them reach more guys, help pastors reach more of the guys in their churches. I'd love to write another devotional. Probably will do so next year, but I'm trying to figure out what topic or what format I should pursue and I'm trying to listen to God. God's really telling me to wait right now on that. So I'm trying to be obedient to that.
Well, if worse comes to worse, if you really run out of ideas, you can talk about how to get through being a sports fan in Ohio, how to emotionally cope with some of the things that sports fans there have been through. Your old stopping grounds. So,
yeah, the last two World Series that the Indians were in were really tough, and I tell the story in I think it's my first devotional about how when the Cavs played the Warriors in the 7th game of the year that they won, I could not watch the game. I actually I hid in my bedroom closet because my wife and kids had it on various TVs. And then when the game was tied late in the game, I took the dogs for a long walk. Actually, I walked them twice. And then I only watched the game when they had won, and I watched the recording because I've been hurt so badly. I've been traumatized by the Indians losing in Game 7 against the Cubs and against the Marlins, and it's been horrible.
Well, you got through it though, and I'm thankful you did because you're doing really good work, Chris. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.